Morning, everyone. I have to say it's quite humbling to be included on a faculty that also includes Dr. Stuart Madden. I'm quite certain you accomplished more over breakfast this morning than I will over my entire career. And when they both come to an end in about 30 years from now, maybe we could compare notes. One of the things I like about this conference is you get to see around a lot of familiar faces. It's like a live Facebook page for ex-Roche employees. As you stand in, you sit in the audience and you hear some really great talks and you start to see what all the other presenters are presenting. You've worked hard on maybe finding one or two points that might add value, and when you get to the conference you start to see a lot of other people encroaching on the point that you hope to make, except the point they're making, they're doing it a whole lot more eloquently and more effectively than you might. Fortunately for me, when one of those presenters is going to be Kevin Lashuk, one way I can offer value is to stay within my 10 minutes. So we'll start with that. Let's just go with the state of the pharma nation for now. So what do we know right now? The economy is unstable. We had a big budget coming out of Ontario yesterday. The payers are refusing to reimburse innovative drugs. The SEBs are coming. There's patent cliffs, rising costs of R&D. Industry reputations tarnished, regulatory restrictions are growing, there's declining influence of the prescriber. I mean, we're talking a disaster of biblical proportions here, real wrath of God type stuff, fire and brimstone falling from the sky. Rivers and oceans are boiling over, the dead are arriving from the grave, human sacrifice, cats and dogs living together, mass hysteria. Now, I guess maybe to quote Bill Murray one more time, let's lighten up, Francis. Maybe it's not quite so bad. However, when you take a look at a lot of these headlines, and you're a sales rep in the industry these days, maybe mass hysteria isn't such a bad way to term it. There are layoffs across this industry, and we're not talking one or two, but when you look at the headlines, we're talking thousands upon thousands of sales reps who are losing their jobs. And it's no wonder why you'd get a title for a presentation like this when a sales rep these days is feeling about as welcome as Rob Ford at the Toronto Star potluck annual staff picnic. Now, I guess it all depends, though, from my perspective, is how you define salesman. If the salesperson is that person who's got a product and they're going out and selling it to somebody in return for payment, you know, that old style detail rep that I thought Andrew Sr. Outlined quite nicely in the debate today, which basically our customers at the time were feeling like we were treating them like morons. Or if it's, to quote Death of a Salesman, the play, be liked and you'll never want. If it's that type of salesperson that we feel is just going out there and building relationships and having a great time on the golf course and buying drinks and it's the life of the party and it's very interesting, well, you know, maybe, you know what, those folks in the sales force aren't needed anymore. But think about the type of salesman that we really need out there. And I'm going to present you with a case study in a second to illustrate the point. But before we go on, let's just do one quick yes or no question. Do you work for a sales organization? That's interesting. And so I guess it depends on how you define a sales organization. I would say anybody in the pharmaceutical industry or anybody supplying does work for a sales organization, unless you're not for profit, which would be the other thing. Because anybody that is working for a for-profit organization, you're basically selling something. You're selling a product or a service or some sort of value add. So I don't know the actual demographics in the room, but the reason I bring that up is if we work for a sales organization, then why do salespeople feel like they're less valued more and more? And let's just take a look at a case study. Now I've got to advance my slide. There we go. Oh, the slides are out of order. Can you go back one? I think I clicked it twice. There we go. Don't know if anybody remembers this Ombudsman report from 2010. It was called A Vast Injustice. Avastin being a drug sold and marketed by Roche at the time for terminal colorectal cancer. At the time, the Ontario government had capped it for patients for 6 months of use. So if you were alive after 6 months, the government wouldn't pay for it anymore. And you wonder, well, was that correct or incorrect? Well, that was the situation at the time. The Ombudsman put out this report, and it was scathing. I won't read all of them. One, because I don't have my glasses on, I can't read the words there, so hopefully you can do better here. But I think maybe we will say, let's read well, you can read them all yourself. But basically, there's some scathing words in there. Regrettably, the situation verges on cruelty for those already afflicted by this unrelenting illness. This was a quote by the Ombudsman of Ontario, directed at the Ontario government at the time. I think for those of us who are in sales and marketing, none of us could have messaged that any better. One of the things I was disappointed when this report came out is the title, "A Vast Injustice." I didn't think of that myself. He did a much better job coming up with a report with a catchy title than we could. And this was the result in the media, and it's very similar to what John just showed, is that when you get the media on your side, but you can see headlines all over the place. Every major paper in Toronto and across Ontario, and I didn't put them all up here, were highlighting the Ombudsman report. In fact, there was a big press conference down at Queen's Park as well. And what was the result of this Ombudsman report? Well, I would say within, I think it might have taken about 6 weeks after it was, we got a call from the government, and basically they ended up uncapping it. And so for patients who were alive after 6 months, they were then getting Avastin paid for at that point for as long as they were alive and needed to take the drug, or it was still being prescribed to them. And so what are the results of all of that, and why am I telling you a case study like that, and how does it relate back to the title of this topic? Well, there's two types of results I could show you, or you most often would see. One would be a sales graph showing sales going up. Another graph that I could show would be government expenditures, because of course they went up as well. But the only result that matters here would be a picture of a patient, or in this case dozens of patients who are alive 2 years later because they were able to get a product that kept them alive, and in some cases continues to keep them alive. And it's that result that matters most in all of this. And how does this relate back then to a salesperson? Well, if you think about it, that Ombudsman report didn't happen on its own. Somebody had to file a complaint. The Ombudsman title was basically selling the report because it was very catchy. The press conference was selling the contents of the report because it was out there communicating. The media was selling their newspapers with catchy headlines and also selling the report. All of these things together were selling the importance of getting this product to patients and paying for patients, and the importance of us as an industry and collaborators to keep patients alive and work on the behalf of patients. So the art of selling skills is obviously still alive. I would say that the tipping point, though, in all of this was when one salesperson sat down with one key stakeholder, because up until this point the traditional things had been tried: a budget impact analysis, a PLA, sitting down with the government to discuss why this was important, having key opinion leaders lobby the government on your behalf. All of those things were tried. None of them had worked for whatever reason. But when a sales approach was taken to this, and a stakeholder, the right stakeholder, was taken, who then rallied one patient, who made a call to the Ombudsman, who rallied key opinion leaders to then write letters to the Ministry of Health after the Ombudsman investigation came out. And of course, the result was that patients benefited. So I would say that although we are cutting sales forces across the country and across the industry, let's not forget the importance of selling skills. Selling skills in the way of, is it communication? Is it persuasion? Is selling influence? Telling stories? Those types of things need to be embedded in the organizations that all of us work for if we're in a sales organization, because without those, if you're hiring a medical science liaison or market access people or anybody in the head office, or you're out selling a service, without the selling skills of today of persuasion, influence, communication, telling stories, you're not going to get the results that you are looking for out of your own organization. Now, on behalf of patients, the same thing will exist. I have one more question for you. Is customer centricity a significant part of your company's strategy? There we go, 87%. I've heard the term customer centricity for 7 or 8 years in this industry now. We've seen that in, I think the slide or the poll a little bit earlier, most people are identifying the patient as their primary customer. And I do think it's interesting. At Leo Pharma, we have identified that we only have one customer, and that is the patient. But as an industry, we've heard so far pretty much all morning, and I think we might again as the day goes on hear about that we need to put the patient and understand the patient's journey at the center of everything we do. And that if we do that, maybe that the industry will be more successful than we have been for the last couple of years. However, I wonder why it is that although we keep saying it, why doesn't anybody believe us? Why haven't we been successful enough in selling this? The fact is that we can say it all we want, but the problem is we don't act it out. I often think that people look at our industry and say, yes, you say that you're patient-centric and you care about patients, but the reason you care about patients is they are assets for you, assets to increase your bottom line. And in some cases, I think we could take a look at ourselves and say, yeah, that's probably true. And this is where the sales force is going to come back in. If your sales reps are out there detailing messages and treating your customers like morons, if they are out there building relationships for the sake of building relationships or being incented on how much they can build market share or sales, then you're not really patient-centric. But if you have a sales force that's out there, the single most important thing we can do is have conversations with the stakeholders who are interested in the same things we are. It's improving this healthcare system, improving outcomes for patients, and if your sales force acts and truly cares about patients and collaborates and creates values with each and every stakeholder on behalf of patients, now people will start to listen to our words, because selling is more than words, it's how we act. And I do think that the place that this is going to make a change is changing the way we develop and implement our sales forces. So on that, I'll close with this, that, to quote, I think Mark Twain, the reports of my death are greatly exaggerated. Thank you.